Welcome to Journeys of Discovery, a Changemakers collaboration with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm Michael Hayman, and today we're with you at the Royal Festival Hall on the South Bank in London. I'm joined by Petroc Trelawny, classical music radio and television broadcaster and the voice behind BBC Radio 3's breakfast programme. We'll be exploring Petroc's background in classical music and his new book, Trelawny's Cornwall, which explores his ancestry along with the wider culture and landscapes of the place that shaped his upbringing. Petroc, welcome to Journeys of Discovery. It's a pleasure to see you, not least somebody who really does know their classical and orchestral music. We're here at the Royal Festival Hall. We're moments away from Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody, a theme of Paganini. We've been listening to the dress rehearsal, and I was thinking, if that was the dress rehearsal, I mean, what's awaiting?
Concert promises to be pretty good, doesn't it? I love the rehearsal process. It's always fascinating, isn't it, when you see something coming together. And obviously, this is the end of a journey. You know, the orchestra will have done 3 or 4 rehearsals to get to this point. So they'll be, ready to go, and the dress rehearsal should be pretty much as good as the concert itself. But it's fascinating, isn't it? That sense of watching something come together, of watching the players play their parts, the conductor work out how they bring them together in the finest possible way.
I totally
to take
agree.
it beyond what's notes on paper.
I mean, when you're sat there and you're watching it, and you're sort of the heartbeat sort of lessons, you're sort of in there, and all of a sudden, Vasily Petrenko, the conductor, he pulls them out because it's not like that, it's like this, and actually you are involved in something which is, it's akin to sport or any elite activity where actually performance is a major part of it. What's good enough to our ear, not good enough to theirs.
Yeah, and when I've been involved in rehearsals myself, when I've been doing sort of words and music programs with orchestras, sometimes with the Royal Philharmonic, it is interesting how much stuff changes in rehearsal, how you just go over things again. You just think, we could be a little bit tighter here, a little bit looser here. We could give a greater moment for reflection here. And how these thoughts kind of lodge in your mind as a performer, then to be relayed during the actual show itself. I find it a really satisfying process, actually.
It's a wonderful thing to see, but I suppose it's also part of the whole journey of music, which is whether you are right at the beginning of it or whether you are really at the top of your game in it, is that you've got an experience with it. And I suppose I was thinking there's a great Walt Whitman quote about be curious, not judgmental. I mean, I think there is a curiosity to music. I mean, I was curious to see how the dress rehearsal would go, but I also feel that there is just something about music in terms of how it opens our minds to think. And I wonder how your experience, somebody who's been, presenting on Radio 3 since 1998, somebody who really does know their onions when it comes to music. Does it still have a wonderment for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Pick up the story.
No, it does, absolutely. You can still be surprised by it. Even pieces, I don't know, this piece we're hearing this afternoon, I've probably heard the Rachmaninoff Paganini variations in concert 50 times. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, Beethoven 5, the Goldberg variations of Bach. And yet you can still hear a piece as if you're hearing it for the first time. And that's partly about the performance and the performer, but I think it's also partly about your mood. I mean, it's that idea, isn't it, that an art gallery is nothing if the lights aren't turned on. Yeah. You need the light to illuminate the pictures. And you need the audience to be prepared to give as much, I think, to the process of making music happen as the performers, not obviously in a technical way. But, we have to go in open. We have to go in being prepared to be surprised, being open-minded about what we're going to hear. And a lot of that, I guess, drives from, our personal mood when we go to a concert.
Right.
Is it something we're really looking forward to? Is it something we want to be emotionally moved by? Have we had a tough day and actually, I'm not sure I do really want to go to this concert tonight? And then magically, the world opens up in front of you and you leave completely refreshed and given new energy.
I totally agree with that. I mean, actually, when you were saying about sort of wanting to be emotionally moved by, I was thinking, when you've been doing, working as you have within the sort of musical arena, I mean, to what degree is music a passion of the head or the heart, do you think?
I think it's both, actually.
Right.
I mean, it's very seldom that I go to a concert and I'm not engaged by it, even though it is my work. I mean, I'm blessed that it is my work, and that, you know, listening to music is introducing music for other people to listen to as well, is what I do for a living. And, you know, sometimes it can be the venue, sometimes it can be the performer, sometimes, as I say, it can be the mood that you're in. I mean, I remember particularly Andras Schiff and Alina Ibrahimova and Yo-Yo Ma at the Proms about 10 years ago, doing solo works by Bach for violin, cello, and piano. And that shouldn't have worked. You know, the idea of listening to the Bach solo partitas played by a single violinist standing inside the vast space of the Royal Albert Hall, a space well known, obviously, to the RPO. It kind of shouldn't have worked. I mean, this is music written to be performed in a really tiny space. Even the Wigmore Hall's quite
So why did it work?
It worked because I think we were all prepared to go on a journey together.
Right.
And I remember I was sitting in a box right opposite where Alina was on stage, or where Yo-Yo was on stage, so as far away as possible. You know, if you think of the Albert Hall actually it's not a circle, everyone thinks it's a circle, it's actually an oval, but if you think of it as far away from the stage as possible, so as far away from the source of the sound, which meant that I and everybody else there had to really, you know,
lean forward,
you know, maybe cup our ears from time to time. Any cough or extraneous noise would have really compromised everybody else's listening. And of course, people do make noise. It's not a problem. People do make noises. That's nature. But people were listening with such a sense of silence and respect, and it just made it extraordinary. It just made it sound as if we were hearing all of those pieces, as if we were hearing them for the first time. As if they were completely new pieces. You know, Yo-Yo doing the Bach cello suites, which we hear certain movements of, you know, have really become part of the musical vocabulary. And to hear them reinvented in that situation was very, very exciting.
Well, you touched on something that I'm quite interested in, which is not directly but indirectly, which is the relationship between an orchestra and its audience, and I suppose the circularity. I mean, how does that relationship work? I mean, you see it up close.
I think it's an essential relationship, isn't it? I mean, it's toast and a marmalade, or bacon and eggs, or whatever. And I think, you know, I'm not a great believer in rigid rules for an audience. You know, people are going to make noises every so often. People feel inspired to clap. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine at the end of a movement, for example, if they've been particularly excited by something they heard. And I think the energy that an audience brings can double the energy of an orchestra.
Right.
You know, the orchestra brings the first energy, that excites the audience feed it back, if you like, and it's like a kind of backwards and forwards it goes. And, you know, sometimes you get an audience that is a very informed, educated audience who are hearing a song recital, a set of songs by Schubert or something that they've heard a dozen times before. Sometimes you get an audience that's brand new to classical music. You know, we get that sometimes when we do things like the film Proms with the RPO, which is absolutely thrilling. You know, people hearing music that they know the score to Harry Potter or to Star Wars or whatever, and they've seen it in the cinema and they've heard it on the radio. But then when they hear it performed by a live orchestra, that sense of visceral excitement is something quite remarkable. You know, that hearing, you know, that feeling, that sense, that awareness of people hearing an orchestra for the first time.
Do you have a favourite type of audience, or is that one of those kind of like Bruce Forsyth questions? But again, they're all my favourites.
I think they are all my favourites. I think all audiences are really, really important. You know, the music industry needs the people who are really full-on fans of Schubert's song or Brahms' piano sonatas or Bruckner symphonies. And it also needs that audience that's coming in to hear an orchestra bringing to life something that they have previously only known through going to the cinema or playing a video game, for example, or perhaps going to see a musical in the West End. You know, the magic of hearing, you know, a West End music score which would be played in a theatre with maybe 12, 15, 20 players, played by an orchestra of 70 or 80. We need that, and we need everything in between.
Right. Have you seen that, I suppose, that journey, though, in terms of people that do arrive for that kind of like that first experience? I mean, have you...
Yes.
I mean, how have you seen that journey unfold?
I think that there's definitely a journey there of people who go and hear an orchestra who are drawn in because they know they like the music of John Williams. or they know they like the music of Mozart, for example, if they have, they've got an interest in classical music, and then are seduced by the sound of the orchestra and the experience of the orchestra and the magic of seeing 60, 70, 80 people on stage together, making something work, bringing something to life. And then they come back.
Right.
And their hunger for repertoire does get broader and wider. And you see that a lot, for example, at the proms. And I think it's one of the arguments why it's really important that we don't ghettoize new music, for example, that we will put a piece of new music, a new commission by a young British composer, alongside Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto will clearly sell itself because it's got great tunes. Everybody knows it. The piano part is the epitome of romance. And actually then put something different alongside that.
Push some boundaries.
Yeah, maybe another 20th century work that's a little bit more challenging than the Rachmaninoff. Or maybe a brand new piece of music. And actually most people will respond very positively to that and will therefore, broaden their interest in what they're listening to.
Because I think the RPA was quite an important distinction, which at the beginning of actually getting to know the orchestra, I hadn't actually thought it through properly, but they don't really talk about classical music, but they do talk a lot about orchestral music. And I think that, there is an importance in language actually, because because just the very sound of an orchestra can lead to a reaction from people. And whereas if they thought it was just classical, they might think it's stuffy, it's not for me, or that. But I think actually the semantics actually do matter, because actually if you can just get a person to listen to what it means to bring a big group of human beings together that are putting all of those instruments together in one way.
There's also, I think, something about a symphony orchestra playing that is inherently theatrical.
Yeah.
That's the other point. I mean, it is a piece of theatre. When you look across the stage and you've got the timpanist back right, and you've got a row of 6 horns to the left, and then you've got the double basses, lined up in 2 rows on the right-hand side of the stage, these serried ranks of violinists, first and second violins, stretching back from the conductor on the first side of the stage, the cellist, sort of a wall of cellos, on the other side.
It's a marvellous thing to see.
There is a fabulous theatrical quality to that. That is part of the experience. Obviously all of those people come together to create this sound, but it is about theatre as well. And I think great orchestras like the RPO never forget that. If you forget the fact that you're producing fabulous sound and bringing to life notes maybe written on a piece of paper 100 years earlier, or maybe 6 months earlier, but you are also creating a piece of theatre. And I think that's really important. It has to be a theatrical experience.
But I also think that's why the dress rehearsal is in its way also special, because of course you see the musicians not in their finery, but actually in their everyday clothes. Yeah. And that's also a kind of out-of-body experience. Kind of like, well, these people are probably going to be on Southwest trains or catching the underground. And that's true,
journey home that
we've all got.
The rest of it, even though they're somehow magicians who you sort of expect to fly on a magic carpet.
Let's go back, Petroc, because I suppose, the thing I'm thinking about is where did this all start? Because I've seen you in action. You have this encyclopedic knowledge. You have this clear passion for your work. But nobody wakes up sort of at the school careers fair and thinks I'm going to go and work sort of presenting classical music today. Or had this been a long held ambition?
No, not really. I sort of in a way fell into it. I grew up in West Cornwall. I went to a comprehensive school in Helston, great school, where the big careers push was towards the Navy. We had a big naval base nearby, or to the remains of the sort of industrial life of old Cornwall, which is pretty much gone now. I wanted to be a journalist. That was what I wanted to do. Maybe I thought about maybe acting, but I realised quite quickly that was quite a tough life. And
so acting or journalism, what news journalism? Or,
I thought I wanted to do something that was performative, I guess. And
that's interesting. Okay, so performative. So where do you think that came from?
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
Parents,
I don't think in any obvious way. My dad was in the army all his life. My mum was an army wife. She was a good musician. She played the church organ. She played the piano.
Okay, so there was a musical
and she was very much, she was very much kind of encouraged me to have piano lessons and things when I was a teenager. My dad had a classic kind of collection, a lot of RPO recordings actually, of sort of, 150 LPs of the solid repertoire of popular classics, along with Oklahoma and South Pacific and My Fair Lady and all those sort of things, your 100 best tunes, the Mercury Living Classics recordings with Paul Paré and the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, those kind of great recordings on LP that people of that generation often had. And I thought, as I said, I thought about acting. Did quite a lot of acting at school, but I think I realised that I didn't quite have enough passion for that, and the level of passion required there was enormous. And journalism, probably broadcasting, radio or television seemed like a way to go. And I got a job.
And of course, you do write a lot. I mean, you've done...
Well, I do now. I didn't so much then, actually.
Right,
I mean, that's something that's come later.
Right.
I obviously had to write for radio, but in terms of writing for print or writing a book now, that's something that's come later on. But I left school at 18. I hadn't really done very much work in the sixth form because I was busy doing the school plays and also doing a bit of broadcasting for
But what was music still with you? Were you still playing the piano?
No, I'd stopped.
Right. You stopped.
I'd stopped. Right. I sort of got up to grade 5, and then I just thought, you know what, I haven't got the sort of passion for this. And I think I was frustrated at the fact that I wasn't good enough quickly enough. You've got to be prepared to work through. If
we're all like that, aren't we? We're all impatient.
You've got, some people are blessed with that natural ability who can just do it and speed through their grades and be playing in a way that's very satisfactory. Others of us are a bit more lumpen. And then you really have to press forward, don't you? I think in terms of whether you keep going to get to finally cross that magic point.
Right. So where was the big break into music then in your life?
I joined the BBC at the age of 18 in local radio. Did that for a couple of years as a sort of jack of all trades, really, reporting, presenting in strange times of day, all that sort of thing. And then I went to work for British Forces Radio in Hong Kong in the early 90s. Did an 18 months there, which was very much presenting pop music. Kylie Minogue and Rick Astley and Jason Donovan, who were the big stars.
A great trio. I'm glad you've mentioned that. I'm glad that the trinity of quality pop.
Trinity of early 90s pop.
Never going to give you up. But anyway, come on. Stop it.
Great producers. And while I was in Hong Kong, I planned to stay there, actually. I was going to go and join RTHK, the government broadcaster. And Classic FM was setting up. This is 92. And they suddenly found themselves without a drive time presenter. The guy who was due to present drive time decided he wasn't going to risk leaving the BBC to go to Classic. And the guy who was the second in charge of Classic FM, this is one of those bizarre, happy coincidences, was a very keen parachute jumper. And if you're a parachute jumper, you collect drop zones. And one of the most desirable drop zones to collect was Hong Kong. I don't know if that's still the case. The only place I've ever done a parachute jump, that's another story. And he was out there parachuting, and he heard my show on BFBS. And when they needed a...
I hope he wasn't parachuting while he was doing it.
I don't think so. I think it was probably in the morning before he went up. He said, oh, well, actually, I think this person in Hong Kong, you've never heard of him, but maybe he'd be the right person. So I did a demo tape, sent it back, and literally a week later, I was on a plane back to London, and literally 3 weeks later, Classic FM was on air with Henry Kelly doing the morning show and Nick Bailey doing the breakfast show and me doing the afternoon show from studios in Camden Town. And Classic was a kind of immediate success. I mean, its launch was staggering. I mean, I think they predicted we'd have 2 million listeners within 2 years, and we had sort of 3 million within a year. And it was a very successful business that just absolutely found a new audience and really did.
It has been very successful.
Has been very successful, and managed to identify this new audience for classical music.
But I suppose also because it's not just the music, but I suppose it's the enthusiasts that they brought alongside it in terms of the presenters that can bring the stories of music to life. And I'm wondering, when you put that sort of Classic FM and Radio 3 experience together in terms of that concentrated part of your life where it's music day in, day out, how does Petroc evolve from those kind of early days of Classic FM to where we are today in terms of your relationship with music?
Well, when Classic FM launched, I knew very little about music. Anything beyond the fact that Mozart came from Vienna and lived in the 18th century and Stravinsky came from Russia and lived in the 20th Did I even know that? I'm not even sure I knew that. I probably did know that, but not much more. And of course, it therefore became a very quick learning curve.
Right.
Because we were introducing all this music, you had to have something to say about it. So I suddenly found myself going off and reading and listening. And, I started reading liner notes, but the problem is there's only a certain amount on liner notes that you can use more than, you've used it.
Were you intimidated by that at all? Because
I don't think I was, and I think I probably should have been. I think I probably should have been intimidated, but I was 21.
Yeah.
So I think
so you could fake it till you make it.
Yeah, and I don't think I seem to have kind of just sort of complete confidence at that point. I look back and think, gosh, where did that come from? Because that's something that I think leaves you later on in life in a funny sort of way. And
but did you ever have any of those moments where you met someone? Because I was thinking about, especially in something like classical music, it is an arena where you come across people with great levels and depths of expertise.
Yes.
When you sort of were going up the hill rather than being on top of it, how did you deal with that situation where you're presenting? And
Classic used to have, regular big stars would come in to visit. I mean, I remember, we had these open plan offices in Camden Town, and there was a very rather alarmingly steep staircase. It was in a basement in a building next to the canal. And you'd look up and you'd see some star coming down the stairs. And I remember Andre Previn coming in, Michael Tilson-Thomas coming in, the three tenors individually, each one of them coming in at different points, Kiri Tikanawa coming in, Julian Bream. And then they'd sit on a pair of sofas, a bit like this, I suppose, in the middle of the room, where they'd sit and wait. And I'd just go over and say, hello, and say, oh, I'm Petroc, I'm doing the Drive Time show, and we often play your recording of this, and, tell me when that recording, was made or whatever. So I get a bit more knowledge and stuff I could use on air. And they were all unfailingly warm, enthusiastic, and nice. And I think it was partly because they all realised that Classic FM at that point was bringing them a new audience.
Yeah.
And that was great because ultimately that translated to ticket sales or record sales. So therefore, embrace it,
Yeah.
It was an audience that, funnily enough, it didn't hit, the Radio 3 audience wasn't touched by it. The audience came from Radio 4 and Radio 2 in the BBC. So it was a new, and that continues pretty much to be the case. So it was a brand new audience. Millions of people listening to classical music for the first time. So everybody wanted to be part of that. So all the artists who came in, who you might think would be rather grand, absolutely the opposite.
Right.
Everybody was
and they, I suppose they saw that as the lifeline for their craft.
Yeah.
And also, I suppose, with the new audiences, was that because there was a more informal relationship with music. Because I always think that Classic FM is sort of like the sort of thing you can quite easily have on while you're at work or in the garden. There's a kind of, with the BBC, is it different? Because, your audience figures are going up as well, aren't they? I mean, but a couple of 100,000 new listeners I was reading. So what's been changing there, do you think, in terms of the relationship with the audience?
I think, we're clearly very different radio stations. What we're about at Radio 3 is brilliant live music, celebrating performance and performance. An awful lot of our output is specially recorded, a concert every evening, 3 hours of music every afternoon that, is members of our New Generation Artist Scheme or the BBC orchestras, which are based, Glasgow, Cardiff, Manchester, London, the Ulster Orchestra in Belfast, recordings from the EBU, all of them that you can't listen to in any other way except on Radio 3, presenting programmes that really cover composers in great detail. Composer of the Week that Donald MacLeod and Kate Mollison present every day, a 5-hour deep dive, 5 hours across the week, deep dive into the life of a particular composer. Record Review, which is a really ambitious program saying, look, these are the best recordings. This is a really interesting new recording because of this. That stuff that nobody else does. I mean, few other broadcasters globally, but no one else in the UK does. And I think there is a sort of hunger for that sort of deep dive. I think there is a sort of sense, in a way, podcasts are helping fire that, like this, that, there are so many podcasts out there that are really ambitious in terms of how they cover. The Rest is History, for example.
Brilliant podcast.
Brilliant podcast that does, 4 or 5 episodes on one tiny part of history.
And it's amazing how we deep dive into it.
And I think that's making people think, I want to I want to explore this in more depth. And I think that gives Radio 3 a real reason, a real purpose. I think that, and I also think the range of music we play, which is much broader than classic. I mean, classic have a narrower music plot than they had when they went on air. Ours is still incredibly broad in terms of the range of repertoire we play. I think there is still a thrill about hearing a live performance, and knowing that you've basically got the same experience as the person sitting in the Festival Hall or the Wigmore Hall or the Bridgewater Hall or whatever. So I think that those are all reasons why, we really matter still, and actually why the future looks pretty bright. And I think, it's Radio 3 is also a real sign of the BBC's commitment to public service broadcasting, which, is being challenged, but is undimmed.
Right. Let us move to Cornwall, because, I mean, if there is anyone who has the right to talk about Cornwall, Petroc, I mean, someone named after the patron saint of Cornwall. I mean, Cornwall is I suppose, your other passion in life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because I left Cornwall when I was 18 and I couldn't wait to get away.
Right. Why was that?
I think it felt very distant, a long way from anywhere. It felt a bit dull. It felt very boxed in. I wanted to work in the media. I wanted to be somewhere where the lights glittered. And gradually, I suppose London was the ultimate destination. I got there via Exeter. Well, they burn a little bit brighter, perhaps the lights of Exeter than Cornwall, and then Hong Kong, and then eventually London.
What was the moment where you thought, actually, there's more for me to know about my home?
I think it was, and I have to be careful how I say this, because I think it was kind of a bit around the death of my father, who died 11 years ago now, and throughout my life, I would always go back to Cornwall to see him. We had a very close relationship, and I would go, 4 or 5 times a year, probably for a long weekend. But I never stayed more than 3 or 4 nights. And then after his death, I without making any connection, I booked a holiday in Cornwall. I thought, I'm going to go back to Cornwall for 2 weeks. I've never done that. I haven't been in Cornwall for 2 weeks since I was 18. And I suddenly realised that now I had Cornwall on my own terms, that previously everything about Cornwall had been through my father.
Through the lens of a parent.
Through the lens of a parent. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm dismissing him in any way, because as I say, we were very close. But it just sort of gave me the whole play. And I suddenly thought, actually, I could spend a lot more time here. And gradually I got involved in more things. I'm on the board of the fabulous Hall for Cornwall in Truro, which has just had a multi-million-pound brilliant reinvention and is now one of the country's leading theatres. I'm very much involved in the International Musicians Seminar at Prussia Cove, which is an amazing gathering of the very best young chamber musicians twice a year. I'm involved in the Penley Gallery in Penzance and various other initiatives down there. So I spend a lot more time down there. I do my breakfast show down there sort of probably about 8 or 10 weeks a year from the BBC studios in Truro. And then I got commissioned to write this book. And I
tell us about the book. Yeah.
Well, it sort of, they asked me if I'd write a history of Cornwall. And I said, well, I'm not really a historian, so I don't want to do a kind of, a beginning to end
and all that.
History. But I said, what I would be interested in doing is sort of writing a bit of a memoir, a book that was partly a memoir, exploring the Cornwall of my childhood and using that to link in to different specific aspects of Cornish history, which turned out to range from Methodism and the way chapel absolutely dominated life in Cornwall and has now almost disappeared. Truro Cathedral and how that became a focal point for the county, the collapse of mining, Cornwall and the Civil War, music and culture in Cornwall, the River Tamar, which, is our border. The border, as we say, between Cornwall and England, which actually runs, you think of it in Plymouth and Brunel's majestic bridge crossing the Tamar. But it actually is the border for all but 3 miles. I mean, it pretty much reaches Bude in the north. And if it went on a little bit further, Cornwall would be an island. Yeah. And it gave me this really amazing opportunity to dig deep into bits of Cornish history that really, really fascinate me. I hope people are going to find it satisfying. I mean, it brings together, as I say, this sense of memory, along with history, along with quite a lot of reflection on where Cornwall is now. I talk about Coverack, which is a very achingly pretty village on the Lizard Peninsula where my grandparents lived. They were the local doctors there. And I remember it as a child as a place that had a lot of summer visitors, but was still a real village with a real heart. And it still does have that heart, but it's on a bit of a cusp as to whether it is a tourist place or a real place.
Right.
And that's happened to lots of other places in Cornwall. And I explore that and the whole issue of what tourism and second homes and holiday lets have done to Cornwall, because they've been essential to the Cornish economy, but they've also been very bad.
And I think we probably need a whole other episode to go into sort of second homeowners and the relationship with Cornwall. But I suppose what it's interesting, sort of, we're talking about Cornwall, but it's also not just where you are today, but where you started in life. And I'm thinking about the 18-year-old Petroc that was about to go out and experience the world, didn't yet know that classical music, orchestral music would be such an important part of your journey, that travel would be an important part of your journey, but ultimately Cornwall, again, would be such an important part of your journey. These sort of wonderful strands that give your life the richness, the cultural richness that you have today. What's the advice you'd give to that 18-year-old version of yourself, Petroc, in terms of if you had your time to actually have that moment to give that advice?
I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, I feel very blessed with the way my life has turned out. I mean, obviously, you know, there are lots of things I might have done differently. I think my advice probably would be just make sure you enjoy everything enough. You know, just give yourself. I think perhaps, particularly when I was younger, you know, you sort of rush on to the next thing, don't you? And you're always looking down the line rather than celebrating what's in front of you. And I guess that's perhaps what I would tell myself. But I think that's a pretty universal thing, isn't it?
Well, I once had a friend of mine said, one day you're going to wake up and realise you have to look back and enjoy the view, which I thought was quite a good way of putting it.
So make sure there's a nice view. But I think just always always make time to enjoy it, you know, because a lot of stuff will only happen once, and you won't get to do it again. But you know, I feel, you know, touch wood, very, very lucky.
Petroc, thanks so much for joining me on Journeys of Discovery.
Thank you for having me.